Aisha Sharma, as secret love with Michael Anderson, was supposed to be her escape from a life of control, but Rajesh Sharma's rage, Anika Sharma's silence, and Arjun Sharma's ruthless influence turned her dream into a nightmare, leaving Priya Mehta as the only voice to reveal the brutal truth behind an honor killing that shocked Texas forever. Aisha Sharma had always been the pride of her family. Born to Rish and Anika Sharma, she grew up in a strict Indian household in Texas where traditions were followed with unyielding devotion. The Sharma family had built a life for themselves in a quiet suburb outside Houston. But even with the move to America, Rajesh held tightly to cultural values that emphasized obedience, reputation, and honor. For Aisha, these expectations felt like chains. At school, she was a bright and popular student, admired by teachers and friends alike. But at home, she lived under constant scrutiny. Every aspect of her life was monitored, from the way she dressed to the people she spoke with. Rajesh's word was final. Anika, though softer in demeanor, rarely challenged him. By the time Aisha turned 21, she had mastered the art of hiding parts of her life from her family. She had learned to present herself as the dutiful daughter, while carefully carving out a secret world of her own. In this hidden life, she met Michael Anderson, a fellow college student studying architecture. Michael was charismatic, kind, and completely different from anyone her parents would approve of. He came from a local Texas family with no ties to Indian traditions. And he treated Aisha as an equal, rather than someone bound by strict expectations. What began as study sessions at the library soon grew into stolen moments, late-night conversations, and eventually a romance Aisha had never dared to dream of. For Aisha, being with Michael was a taste of freedom. He gave her the courage to imagine a future where she could make her own choices without fear of judgment. But as much as she cherished the relationship, she knew the danger it carried. Her father's views on honor and tradition were uncompromising, and he had made it clear from a young age that dating outside their culture was forbidden. Rajesh often warned his children that family reputation mattered more than personal desires. To him, love was not something chosen but arranged, and any deviation was an insult to the family's dignity. The pressure in the Sharma household intensified. When Rajesh began making plans for Aisha's future, he spoke of a suitable match back in India, a man from a respected family who could uphold their traditions. Aisha listened silently, her heart pounding as she concealed the truth of her relationship with Michael. She knew that revealing her love would be seen as betrayal, one that could shatter the fragile balance at home. Still, she could not bring herself to end things with Michael. Instead, she became more cautious, meeting him in secluded places, carefully deleting messages, and lying to her parents about late study sessions. Despite her efforts, secrets have a way of surfacing. Aisha confided in her closest friend, Priya Mehta, who had long suspected something was going on. Priya warned her about the risks of being discovered, reminding her of stories they had heard about families who took drastic measures in the name of honor. Aisha brushed off the warnings with nervous laughter, convincing herself that her parents would never go to such extremes. She believed that in time, she might find the courage to tell them the truth, and that perhaps love would prevail over tradition. But Aisha underestimated how deeply rooted her father's beliefs were. While she dreamed of building a future with Michael, Rajesh began noticing subtle changes in her behavior. Late nights, guarded conversations, and the evasive look in her eyes planted seeds of suspicion. Rajesh was a man who valued control, and when he felt that grip slipping, it triggered something dangerous within him. For Aisha, the walls of a double life were beginning to close in, and though she didn't realize it yet, the choices she had made in the name of love would soon place her in a deadly conflict between freedom and family honor. Aisha Sharma had always been an observant man. Over the years, he had developed a sharp instinct for sensing when something was amiss in his household. For weeks, he had noticed small but unsettling changes in his daughter's behavior. Aisha was no longer the quiet and obedient daughter he thought he knew. She smiled to herself when she thought no one was watching. She guarded her phone like it carried state secrets, and she invented excuses for late nights at school or long study sessions that never quite added up. At first, Rajesh dismissed these things as the natural restlessness of youth, but the feeling that she was hiding something gnawed at him. He confided in his cousin, Arjun Sharma, who had recently moved to Texas, and shared his strict views on honor and family. Arjun's words only fueled Rajesh's suspicions. Arjun had always been fiercely protective of family reputation, and when Rajesh hinted that Aisha might be involved with someone, Arjun's reaction was severe. He warned that if the girl was indeed disobeying tradition, it would bring shame not just on Rajesh's household, but on the extended family. The idea that whispers could spread among their community terrified Rajesh, who had built his life around the respect of others. For men like him and Arjun, honor was more important than truth, and reputation was more valuable than love. It was not just about Aisha's choices, but about what those choices symbolized. To them, disobedience was humiliation, and humiliation was intolerable. As days passed, Rajesh began taking quiet steps to confirm his fears. He checked Aisha's phone when she left it unattended, but she had become too careful, deleting messages and hiding evidence. He started driving past the university, watching from a distance, hoping to catch her in a moment of carelessness. One evening, his persistence paid off. He spotted her walking across the campus parking lot, her hand slipping into that of a young man he did not recognize. The sight stopped him cold. There was no mistaking the affection in her body language. She was smiling in a way she never smiled at home, free and unguarded, and the boy beside her leaned toward her as if he belonged to her world. Rajesh's worst fear had been confirmed. His daughter was in love with someone outside their culture. The discovery festered in Rajesh's mind. He said nothing to Aisha at first, instead returning home with a storm building silently inside him. He told Arjun, and together they began to plan their next steps. Arjun urged immediate action, claiming that to wait was to allow the dishonor to deepen. Rajesh struggled, torn between his love for his daughter and his obsession with tradition. He convinced himself that confronting her too early might push her further away. But his silence was not mercy, it was strategy. He wanted to know who the boy was, how serious the relationship had become, and whether it had already crossed a line he could never forgive. Meanwhile, Aisha continued her secret meetings with Michael, unaware that her every move was under increasing scrutiny. She thought she had been careful, yet she had no idea that her father's suspicions had already turned into certainty. Rajesh began interrogating her indirectly, asking pointed questions about her friends, her classes, and her time away from home. Aisha responded with rehearsed answers, but her nervousness betrayed her. Each lie confirmed to Rajesh that she was lost to him, slipping further into a life he could not control. Tension in the Sharma household became palpable. Anika sensed the growing rift, but found herself powerless to intervene. She loved her daughter, but years of living under Rajesh's authority had taught her to stay silent. She noticed the way Rajesh's eyes followed Aisha with an intensity that bordered on menace, and she feared what would happen when the inevitable confrontation came. Priya, Aisha's friend, warned her again about the risks, urging her to be more cautious. But Aisha brushed it aside. She believed her parents might disapprove, but she could not imagine the level of anger and betrayal that was brewing in her father's heart. Rajesh was no longer simply suspicious. He was certain. And in his certainty, he began to believe that drastic action was the only way to restore the family's dignity. He told himself that what lay ahead was not cruelty but duty, a necessary act to preserve honor. With Arjun's encouragement, the idea of confronting Aisha hardened into something far more dangerous. The stage was quietly being set for a decision that would change all their lives forever. Though Aisha remained blissfully unaware that the love she cherished had already been marked as a crime in her father's. The evening of the confrontation began like any other. But beneath the calm surface of the Sharma home, there was a brewing storm. Rajesh had waited long enough, and with Arjun pressuring him, he decided it was time to face his daughter. The moment was not chosen in anger, but in cold calculation. He wanted the confrontation to happen in the confines of their home, where Aisha could not escape, and where his words would have the most weight. That night, after dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the house had grown quiet, Rajesh called her into the living room. His tone was steady, almost too steady, masking the fury simmering beneath. Aisha walked in with unease, sensing something in her father's demeanor that was different. He asked her simple questions at first, about school, about her studies, about her friends. The questions grew sharper, more pointed, until the name Michael slipped from his lips like a blade. The air froze in that moment. Aisha's eyes widened, her lips parting as the color drained from her face. She had never spoken his name in the house, never dared, yet here it was, laid bare by the man she feared most. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the unspoken truth neither could deny. Rajesh demanded answers. And though Aisha tried to remain composed, her trembling hands betrayed her. She confessed not defiantly, but with a soft, desperate honesty. She told him she loved Michael, that he was kind, that he understood her in ways no one else did. She pleaded that it was not about dishonor, but about happiness. But her words only deepened Rajesh's fury. To him, her love was not innocence but betrayal. A rejection of everything he had sacrificed to maintain his family's standing. Annika watched from the corner, tears streaking down her face, powerless to intervene, while Arjan stood nearby, his arms crossed, a hard expression of satisfaction on his face. The confrontation escalated into shouting, Rajesh's voice thunderous, Aisha's soft protests drowned beneath his rage. He accused her of shaming him, of disgracing their family, of abandoning her culture for selfish desires. Aisha begged him to understand, but the more she spoke, the more he saw defiance instead of devotion. In Rajesh's eyes, she was no longer his daughter, but a symbol of his failure. Arjun added fuel to the fire, whispering that dishonor left unpunished would spread, that others would see his weakness if he allowed her to continue. His words wrapped around Rajesh like chains, tightening his resolve. By the end of the night, Rajesh's decision was no longer a possibility, but a certainty. He told Aisha she would end her relationship immediately and that she was forbidden from seeing Michael again. His words were final, but Aisha, though shaken, refused to agree. That refusal was the spark that turned suspicion into rage, and rage into something far darker. Rajesh saw in her resistance a challenge to his authority, a humiliation he could not endure. From that night onward, the atmosphere in the Sharma household grew suffocating. Aisha was monitored constantly, her movements restricted, her phone confiscated, her freedom stripped away, piece by piece. Annika tried to comfort her in small, quiet ways, but her efforts were futile. Priya, unable to reach her friend, grew increasingly worried, sensing that danger was closer than Aisha realized. Meanwhile, Rajesh and Arjun began to speak in hushed conversations about solutions, about how to restore the family's honor permanently. Aisha believed she had endured the worst in that confrontation, that her father's anger was the peak of his disapproval. What she did not realize was that the worst was yet to come. The decision had already been made, though it had not been spoken aloud in her presence. The question was no longer if her father would act, but when and how far he would go to erase the dishonor he believed she had brought upon their family. Michael began to sense something was terribly wrong when Aisha's messages grew short and infrequent. At first, he assumed it was the stress of school or her parents being stricter than usual, but soon her silence became too heavy to ignore. Days passed without replies, and when she finally sent him a single message late at night, it carried a weight he had never seen in her words before. She told him she was scared that her father had found out about their relationship, and that her life no longer felt like her own. The message was hurried, almost frantic, and ended with a plea for him to be careful too. Michael's worry deepened, and he realized this was no longer just about a family disagreement, but something far more dangerous. He tried calling her repeatedly, but her phone went unanswered. When he finally saw her on campus, she looked different. Her shoulders hunched, her eyes darting nervously, and her usual laughter replaced with a hollow silence. She barely spoke to him, glancing over her shoulder as though someone was always watching. It didn't take long for Michael to understand that her family had tightened their grip on her life. He knew Rajesh had always been traditional, but now there was a darkness surrounding him that Aisha could no longer hide. Priya noticed it too. She confronted Michael in private, telling him that Aisha was in real danger. Priya confessed that Aisha had admitted her father might go to extremes if she didn't obey. The word extremes echoed in Michael's mind, and the thought of losing her in such a cruel way made his stomach turn. He urged Aisha to leave, to go somewhere safe with him, but her fear of her family's reach was stronger than her desire to escape. She knew that even if she ran, Rajesh and Arjun would hunt her down. Because, for them, this was no longer about love, it was about honor. Behind closed doors, Rajesh and Arjun's discussions grew more sinister. Rajesh wrestled with the decision, but every conversation ended the same way, with Arjun insisting that dishonor could only be erased with blood. Annika overheard enough to understand where this was heading. Torn between her husband and her daughter, she tried in vain to soften Rajesh's heart. begging him to think of Aisha as his child, not a burden. But her pleas fell on deaf ears, and each time she spoke, his anger at her weakness only grew. To Rayesh, this was no longer a choice. It was his duty as a father to restore their reputation. As the pressure mounted, Michael tried once more to intervene. He asked Aisha to meet him in a public place, hoping she would feel safe. She came, but only for a few minutes, and her words were filled with desperation. She told him that her father had taken away every ounce of freedom she had, that she was being watched at all times, and that she feared the worst. She begged him not to come near her house, not to try to fight her family, because she didn't want him to become a target too. Her hands trembled as she spoke, and her eyes were wet with silent tears. That night, Rayesh made his decision. Final, with Arjun at his side, he laid out a plan to end what they saw as an insult to their family. Anika sat silently at the table, her heart breaking as she realized there was no way to stop what was about to happen. The line between fatherly authority and calculated violence had blurred, and the outcome had already been set in motion. For Aisha, each passing hour felt heavier, her world closing in on her like a cage. Michael sensed time was running out, but he had no idea how close the danger truly was. What had started as a secret love story was now spiraling into something terrifying, and the storm that was building in the shadows was ready to break. The night of the tragedy came without warning, yet in hindsight, every sign had been there. Aisha was ordered by her father to return home immediately after classes, with Arjun waiting outside to escort her. She walked with her head down, her heart racing, realizing that something had shifted in the air. The usual controlling tone in her father's voice had turned into a cold silence, and she knew deep inside that her fate was being decided. By the time she stepped into the family's house, the walls felt less like a home and more like a prison closing in around her. Anika hovered in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she prepared tea no one would drink. She had tried again to change Rajesh's mind earlier in the day, begging him to send Aisha away, to allow her to start a life elsewhere. But Rayesh remained unmoved, his pride and anger far stronger than the bond of a parent. Arjun only made matters worse, speaking with a certainty that convinced Rajesh this was not just his decision, but a responsibility. For them, the family's honor could not survive Aisha's choices. Michael, miles away, felt a gnawing unease he could not shake. When Aisha failed to answer his last call, he considered driving straight to her house. But he remembered her warning that it would only put him in danger. He stayed restless, pacing, unaware that those would be her final moments alive. Inside the Sharma home, the atmosphere was suffocating. Rahesh called Aisha into the living room, where Arjun sat stiffly, his eyes sharp and unyielding. Anika lingered near the doorway, her heart hammering. Aisha stood silently, her hands clasped together, trying to gather courage she no longer felt. She wanted to beg, to plead for her life. But the icy look on her father's face told her words would be wasted. Rahesh rose slowly, every movement deliberate. His voice was heavy as he told her she had brought shame, that she had chosen love over family, and that her actions had left him no choice. Aisha's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was about to happen. In one swift motion, the act was carried out, final and brutal, stripping away her future in a matter of seconds. Anika cried out, her voice piercing the silence, but it was too late. The honor killing that had been whispered about in secret was now a grim reality. In the days that followed, the story broke across the community. Neighbors whispered, police arrived, and the carefully crafted facade of the Sharma family shattered under investigation. Anika, unable to live with the weight of her silence, eventually told authorities everything. Rajesh and Arjun were arrested, their pride turning into hollow denial as they faced questions they could no longer escape. What they believed would restore honor instead exposed them to worldwide condemnation. Michael was devastated. His grief was tangled with guilt, knowing he had been powerless to save the woman he loved. For Priya, the loss was equally haunting, a reminder of how deeply cultural expectations could twist into cruelty. Aisha's story became more than just a private tragedy. It grew into a chilling example of how love, fear, and rigid tradition could collide with deadly consequences. Her absence lingered in every corner of those who had cared for. The story of Aisha Sharma's life and death left scars on our community, showing how honor, once thought of as noble, could be transformed into a weapon. The memory of her courage, however, lived on a quiet rebellion against a fate she had never truly chosen.